Yes, please. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 16th of September. First up, I'd just like to advise that this meeting has been recorded. And next up, we'll just do the health and housekeeping and safety procedures. So we have male and female toilets located on the ground floor and disability toilets as well. Just take note of all the exits and entries. There's a non-smoking venue. There's a first aid kit available. A defibrillator is available. And just please make sure that you're aware of all the emergency exits and evacuation procedures, and just follow staff or myself if you need to evacuate, in the unlikely that we would have to do that. So we'll now move on to apologies. We haven't got our vote, so put your hand up if you want to speak, because we don't have our queuing for questions, but we've got our voting. Is there anything else I need to, and we'll just check, is there anybody remotely on? Okay, so there's nobody on remotely that we need to have to worry about. So next up, I will take apologies. It looks like we've got a full table today, so that is good. So are there any additional items? No additional items. Declaration of interest? No declaration of interest. Public comment? I'm unaware of any public comment. Oh, we'll be out of here in 10 minutes at this rate. Just confirmation of minutes. So I'm happy to move that the minutes be confirmed. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Is there any comment? There being no comment, we will vote on the minutes. And that is carried unanimously. So next up is item number 6, which is on page 13, and that is the assurance report on the review of the business continuity planning. And we have Ms. Suma and Jason. So when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, in line with the business assurance plan endorsed by Council last year, a review of our business continuity plans was completed soon after, towards the end of last year. Attached to this memo, you'll find the findings and recommendations that have come out of it. What I would like to indicate is that this review was completed prior to COVID-19. So the findings and recommendations are based on scenario-based exercises that were conducted earlier and not how we responded to COVID. But otherwise, all recommendations have been accepted by management and will be part of our follow-up procedures going forward. With me here today, I have Jason McDowell, the Head of Risk and Resilience. He was appointed into this position around the time of lockdown, and one of his roles is to oversee business continuity planning for our organisation, and therefore will also be responsible for actioning the recommendations that have come out from this review. I will now pass over to him for comment before we take questions.
Morning, councillors. The report and the exercise that we went through highlighted a number of business improvements that the organisation is already working through, and has been really great to see through the COVID-19 resurgence planning that the organisation is working towards a number of these improvements. So if you have any questions, happy to take those.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason and Ms. Suma. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Hancock.
Yes, look, I've just. Is that better? Just a couple of questions. Obviously, this was actually written prior to the lockdown with COVID-19. The report is very heavy on emphasis on the exercises rather than our experience. So can you comment as to if that information is actually going to be included to anything going forward?
In relation to the COVID experience?
Yes, thank you.
Being reported back to council. I think it's appropriate to have a conversation with council around the experience of COVID-19 and how, as a council, performed. And I think we need to look at the best platform to be able to do that, to ensure that we've got an open way of being able to ask questions and that sort of thing. So I'll seek advice from governance around making sure we can do that and get the best platform to be able to do that with you.
Okay, I guess there'll be a lot of learnings out of the actual experience of going through the COVID-19 sort of lockdown and putting our BCP to the test, I guess. So I guess not commenting, but it would be nice to actually have that included. But the next question really is just around, do we have any timeline in terms of how we're actually going to progress this?
So so Resilient Organisation has done further work with us as an organisation around the debriefing process. They have provided a number of business improvement recommendations, particularly around COVID-19. In line with that, since I've taken up my role, I certainly have already implemented a number of the recommendations, and a lot of these have been already included in our resurgence planning that's underway. At the moment, in terms of timeframes, I'd expect over the next 12 months that we'll have, including exercises taking place with full council. I need to take that to management team with my progress plan and work plan for the next 12 months regarding BCP.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, guys, for the report. Probably a little bit along the same lines as Councillor Hancock. Any learnings or loggings of recommendations, how does that work? Where do they go, the how, etc., and when are they actioned?
So are you referring to this report particularly?
Yeah, well, I mean, it talks about what may happen.
Yeah, so there are several recommendations that have come from this, and what we're doing is I'm working with Jason to develop an action plan. So that will have priorities, timeframes, and then my division will go and check in with him around if it's been completed, and then that will be reported to council. Well, to this committee, sorry.
Okay, so there is a bit of speed over that because...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just got two questions. On page 21, it identifies the risks around the call centre. Obviously, one of the responses to the COVID pandemic was to invest in a cloud-based system, which allowed for the remote access of the system. So I'm assuming then that the concern is probably either lessened or addressed in some way. If we look at the system that has been purchased, how quickly can staff get into the system without a cell phone, with just, a cell phone or a device outside of the building? Like, is it still reasonably quick to jump on? Just specifically around the call centre risk in particular.
Hi, I'll take that one. So the system generally is it's live, so it's in the cloud, so it's just sort of there. So basically, if we had an incident, the team would. So a lot of the team in the call centre already have laptops, so we're going through issuing laptops permanently to those staff, the new staff that are going in. So literally, they just log in straight from home. So there's no big process that we have to go through to activate it. It's just ready to go pretty much.
So in the scenario that was identified through this exercise, it was around the bomb scenario. So if you have got immediate evacuation of your building, is I guess is the plan that you just send staff home to then retrieve laptops which are stored at home?
No,
That's what I'm wondering is or if they're evacuating, are they told to take a device with them when they evacuate?
Yes, that would be the case. Look, and that is something that we need to work through. So at the moment, all of those staff don't necessarily have a laptop that they're taking home every day, but ultimately that's where we'd like to get to. But it's a bit of a compromise that we have to do in terms of there is 50-something staff in the call centre and having every one of them have a laptop at home at this particular point in time is not practical. But yeah, they would be able to just walk up, grab take their laptop with them and go home.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like there's a lot of consideration gone into that. And then I guess, thank you, Chris. The follow-up question would be similarly to some of the other questions is if we were to look at the actions that have been identified through this report, which are obviously quite specific, which is really good, and then thinking that, in the summary on page 23, it refers to that there's still some way to go, but as Jason, you've just identified, actually a lot of these have now sort of been put in, accepted and responded to. How much standing is that comment? There's still some way to go. How relevant is that still?
I think with the COVID-19 2.0 resurgence planning that's taking place, there's been a lot of consideration by the executive leadership team as well as all the managers across council to ensure that we are ready to go. We've looked at what we implemented when we were going into COVID 1.0 when we were in this room developing that, and we've just built on that. A lot of the managers have been changing their practices around, particularly around rostering staff and how they think about that. So I think we're in a far better space than what we were in March around that, and being prepared for an event such as this. I think if we were to go into COVID tomorrow, I think we're ready to walk out the door and go.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. And my question's also around the follow-up from this. So in terms of the recommendations and the agreed action plan, how long would it be before you were intending to report back on that to us? Because the reason I'm asking is I'm minded to put up an additional recommendation that specifies when that comes back. So I'd like your input as to when that would be.
I think you could probably expect one towards the end of this year, if not early next year, December or January.
Okay, so a 3-month time frame is reasonable.
I think so, because I'm finalised in March and we've actually made a lot of progress today. So it would just be a follow-up procedure and ticking off everything that we've actually already coming back to.
Thank you.
So would you be comfortable with the December date?
Sure, to begin, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Armstrong.
Thanks for the report. I think it's really great, and preparedness is everything. Just wonder if you'd comment on when I read through it, the sense I got was that the workshopping and the work that had been done to test where we're at was all internally focused within our own staff, and obviously who knows what disasters might be out there, but it's likely to transcend or potentially could transcend just our organisation. So in terms of communication, workshopping, understanding what would happen in a particular situation, how does it come outside of the council organisation and connect to other important players in a potential tragedy or disaster?
In relating to a community response?
Well, I note that there is a community response in there, but I guess the challenge and the unexpected or unforeseen is knowing who to go to, who's in charge, who's running the cutter, and it may not necessarily be only the council involved. So my question to you is, how do you think about that in your continuity planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of another part of the function that my role looks after is also the civil defence emergency management for the city as well. So we have a lot of partnerships with all of our major government agencies in town, as well as all of our NGOs and community groups as well. So a lot of the work that we're doing is we're doing everything in tandem. We're not doing things in solo. Recently, we had a lot of our NGOs come into the EOC this week to understand what our response would be. So what's really important to us is making sure we have everybody's aware of that, as well as good communications, being ready and prepared to go immediately should an event happen.
Okay, so because related to that, I was thinking about, there are some good examples of fires, earthquakes, disasters in this country which have involved a broader collaboration of interests to try and work their way through and ensure continuity in a response. So do you seek out, for example, connection with Christchurch and learnings or challenges across intergovernmental organisations dealing with this sort of crisis? What engagement do you have?
That's certainly the desire for that to take place at the moment. The division, so the Risk and Resilience Division, is still relatively new as a whole, and I'm still building a team of staff to be able to provide this to the community. We have really good interlinks with the rest of the Civil Defence Emergency Management team across the country, and that's certainly a desired outcome that we will be working towards over the next 12 months to keep feeding into our business continuity, as well as making sure that we are prepared should something go wrong.
Chris, would you like to make a comment on this?
Yeah, just to explain a little bit further. So as Jason said, we've, as an organisation, decided to put the emergency management, civil defence together with risk, security, business continuity panelling. So it's sort of it's got all of those things for the very reason that you mentioned in terms of having those connected. The other thing to understand is that the emergency management system within New Zealand is quite interconnected. So and it's quite hierarchical. And as you can imagine, over the last sort of year, there's a lot of work being put into it as well. So it does start with the national coordination. So we have this organisation, NEMA, National Emergency Management Office, effectively. So they do quite a good job of coordinating across the country. We then have, so regionally here, Horizons runs the Manawatu Wanganui regional group. So we're quite connected on a group level, and there's a number of sort of governance functions in there. The mayor's involved with one level, I'm involved at another level. And so what they do try and do is to capture the learnings from around the country and filter them through. So the fact that we're part of that system is how we sort of tend to get a lot of the learnings. And and a lot of systems are always, there's always a lot of post-implementation reviews going on, and the learnings are fed through. It's a really important part of the system. So, and I think, Jason's relatively new into the role, but the fact that we're also co-located in Te Awanui with Horizons is quite an advantage for us in terms of keeping that connectedness.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Masuma, and thank you, Jason. Just wanted to understand a little bit about the review that was done, and particularly the consultant's report back, which seemed to have quite a focus around the customer unit and the infrastructure unit. But to just understand, is the work that you're now working on and we might see in December whole of organization, or is it really focusing within those two units?
My understanding is the progress report you'd get is on the recommendations that have come out of this report. So the action plan will be these recommendations lined up with what the status is on each. So there won't be any additional information than that, because those will be beyond the scope of this report in particular.
Yeah,
is that what you mean, sir?
Well, that's certainly helpful to know in terms of setting that expectation. I guess what I'm trying to understand is that in in my reading through the report, it seemed to have quite a focus on
does.
some of our units and lesser focus or absence of focus on some of our other units, and just
Yeah.
wondered if you could give us the whole
Absolutely.
picture in terms of where we're actually going around continuity planning at the organizational level.
No, absolutely. So my understanding is when this review was completed, and I wasn't involved as much at that point, but they did the scenario-based exercises with infrastructure and customer only, and that is what the recommendations are based on. So that was the 2 units they did it with. But when we implement them, we would be implementing them across the organisation where applicable.
And in your view, I guess where you sit now and your role is there need for us to think about the other units as well in terms of review and
So
progress?
one of the recommendations is to look at our business continuity plans. So we would be looking at them for the entire organisation and not just infrastructure and customer.
Great.
Chris?
Chris.
Just a little bit more context on that. So when that initial review was done, the reason that the infrastructure and the customer units were chosen as a good snapshot of the organisation, so it wasn't intended to cover everything, is that between the customer and infrastructure, you've got a fair chunk of the organisation and a fair chunk of the functions that are quite critical in a crisis. So I think that was part of the reason why they were chosen. The other thing is probably just worth mentioning a bit of background to Jason's role and that function within the risk and resilience team around business continuity planning, is that the job is not to write the continuity plans for each unit. Each unit is responsible for their own plan. What that function is, it's a double up on what Masuma's function is as well. I mean, their function is to go and to make sure that we have good systems and processes for how we're going to develop continuity plans, make sure they get tested and improve, and there's an ongoing program of improvement. So the fact that we've got this function now, which we really didn't have before, is something that I hope would give some confidence that we're going to have a focus across the entire organisation. So there will be people within each unit who will probably take the lead for that unit in terms of their business continuity plans. So the fact that we just did the exercise around those 2 was really just about trying to almost like checking on the systems that we have, and that it's assumed that they're probably going to be similar across the organisation, which they should be, because you should have a consistent system.
Great, thank you. Final question that I had, Madam Chair, was just around, I guess, the flavor that came through that review was one of making sure that the plans were regularly exercised and realizing that there's reporting back to come. But if you can give us any comment at this stage around how we're responding to that aspect of the review.
Yeah, absolutely. My intention is to seek the approval from the management team to implement scenario-based training for the organisation, and I'd like to see that happen on a regular basis, not a once a blue moon type of approach. And I think the more that we can do that, the more we can be prepared for a changing environment.
Thanks. And just to clarify what a blue moon is and what a regular basis is.
I would like to see an exercise completed before the end of the financial year, after we've gone through and implemented a lot of the recommendations and improvements that I'd like to see happen.
In a tempo from there?
I think the manager has given the response that he can at the moment. Anything else would be a recommendation from him to the executive leadership team, and the executive leadership team would make that decision. We are yet to see a recommendation from him, and when we do, we'll make that. So he is not in a position at the moment to give any more of an answer than that.
Thank you, Heather.
Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Are there any more questions? I just have one follow-up question from after Councillor Rutherford around the call centre, if I may, Chris. Once a crisis has been announced, what would be the stand-up time? What would be the expectation of the stand-up time for the call centre?
I suppose it depends on the particular scenario and where everyone is. But in theory, because it's a cloud-based system, it's going all the time. So it really is how quickly can someone log in. So I suppose it just depends on the logistics of getting the people, say, home or to another location. So it could be, for instance, if it's not a city crisis, let's say, so that the EOC needs to stand up, that could be a space you could move to. And there's actually laptops and connectivity there, so people could just log in. All they need is a browser. So it's not like it's a system. So it's quite. So I suppose I'm not giving you a specific answer, sorry, but it would just depend on how quickly you can mobilise people either home or to another location. So it could be it should be quite fast.
So when you say quite fast, like say we had a scenario in the middle of the night, this council building's on fire, and we had a crisis. Everyone's at home. How long would it be able to stand the whole thing up? Are we talking 30 minutes, 2 hours?
Yeah, probably very quick. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort
look.
of
I'm sorry, I am guessing here because I'm just sort of, but it would be. My expectation would be certainly.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got a call centre background, and it's just. Yeah.
No, I think it would be fairly fast. So again, it's how long does it take to open your laptop, log in?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
And again, that'll come down to our ability to say have people with laptops taken home so that they can just get out of bed and turn it on effectively.
Another issue. Okay, thank you. Okay, there's no further questions, so we will move, have a look at the recommendations, and there's a second recommendation on the screen that the Chief Executive report back to the recommendations, action plan and progress on the business continuity planning review to the December 2020 meeting of Finance and Audit. I'm comfortable to take those two together. Councillor Johnson, are you happy to move the first recommendation? So we will move those. We're happy to move them. So are there any comments? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I really welcome the report. I think with what's happened in our world in recent times, and having some first-hand experience myself with the Regional Civil Defence Committee, the continued learnings are really, really important. We have greater resilience in this organisation now, and I think if those that have been here a little bit longer will appreciate that perhaps this organisation may have struggled to have fronted a pandemic, or front-footed, I should say, the pandemic as it did. Our stand-up of the city's business continuity plan, the continuation of essential services, and the stand-up of the EOC actually was New Zealand class. And I think we've got to be a little bit careful that, councillors want the learnings and the improvements out of this plan. And remember, it has been written essentially in February, but amended for this meeting, that we are on a journey, and we're on a good journey. I know that our partners, we are really well connected with our partners, whether it be the Regional Council through the Regional Civil Defence Emergency Management Committee. We spoke about the partners, government partners, but police, FENS, DHB. We're lucky in this city that we have such a strong relationship with Defence as first responders. So if the balloon does go up, we have access to servicemen and servicewomen that run to us almost immediately. Also, what's come out of other things in recent times is the stand-up of our community, NGOs, and we've seen that with food banks, and the improvements that we've got out of the pandemic experience that we've been able to pull through to what you call business as usual. So look, I'm proud of what these our city's done and the offices. I suppose it's the learnings and the improvements that we'll be interested in come December. But I just want to say good work, and we're on a good journey here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd just like to follow up with a comment too, because being around a while, I never had confidence in the continuity planning, and I know Councillor Dennison's nodding because him and I have both been pushing it since we got to council. So it's really good to see that the management is taking this so seriously, and that we've got the organisation, the staff, and everything in place to be able to go forward if the worst happens. Councillor Dennison, I know you'd be dying to.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and
Yeah.
to support what you said, but to also mention that this was coming up in the external audit recurringly, and there was a frustration there. There was a word in there to say reluctancy to engage with completing it, let alone doing any trial runs. And so it's so pleasing to see that we're actually got something that's been quite robust as far as being independently reviewed, and of course having teams doing some exercises, and perhaps now even having a chance once it comes back for review in December, maybe having an annual report at least on what sort of reporting has taken place, whether that's in the health and safety update report just with staff engagement with training, or an independent one that comes through on the work schedule. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, it was good to get this report, although I don't take quite the sanguine view that others have taken about the situation that we're in, given that the summary was that we had a relatively low level of business continuity maturity. And so whilst it's good to know that, I do think there's some urgency to get the recommendations in the action plan back in front of council so that we can actually see how much progress was made, how much learning was done from COVID, and what is still to be done. Whilst it's good to know what needs to be done, we also need to have assurance that it is being done. And so it's very important to me that we get this report back quickly, that we can see where we're at now, whether, as has been suggested, there was significant learning and change done through COVID, or whether there's still more to be done. So I think that this is a good start, but I certainly don't think we can sit back on our laurels with this. We need to be constantly stress testing it and making sure we're in a position to move if need be.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no further questions, so we will go to move to the vote. Comments, sorry. And that is carried unanimously. We will now move on to item number 7, review of elected members' expenses and allowances, and that is on page 25. And we have Hannah presenting that report.
Good morning, everybody. This report is a response to a resolution of the Council from February this year, which asked officers to review the elected member expenses and allowances policy. There were 3 questions within that resolution which we've looked at. Should the policy be extended to apply to appointed members? The definition of official business, and the other recommendations which elected members may or may not agree to today. So the first question, should the policy be extended to appointed members? The report recommends yes for training expenses, so that the appointed members can effectively contribute their skills and knowledge into the committee space, training expenses being the attendance fees and the travel to get there. Noting that the Remuneration Authority remit doesn't extend to appointed members, it's only to elected members, so that would purely be the decision of the council, and that any agreement that appointed members would be included would of course still be subject to the normal application procedures through the normal channels. The second question on the definition of official business, the recommendation is that it's sufficiently wide enough to remain unchanged to be applied appropriately in several different contexts. And that perhaps all that was needed was a little bit of clarity in the structure of the document to make clear where official business was to be applied. To the third question and the other recommendations, I would turn your eyes to the report. Article 4. puts up a bit of an innovative option to members today to consider potentially including a public and active transport allowance. This would be in line with your strategic vision and the action of encouraging active transport. It's not something within the usual limits of the Remuneration Authority, so we would then have to seek the Rem Authority's permission to include that in our expenses policy. It's not abnormal for councils to have individual clauses like this. Christchurch Council, for example, does have a public transport clause in their expenses policy, but that would be entirely up to you if you were interested in encouraging that. It would be a limited cost. Members would need to obviously put in their expense claim and prove those expenses. 4.10 is an inclusion that officers are recommending to you, and that's simply that we include all the hearings, whether it's an RMA or a DLC payment, that those be listed in this expenses policy so that that's public and on the website, and also the remuneration determination all in one place. That would be in line with the Rem Authority's advice to do so. And then there's a list of possible changes in 4.13, any of which you could add or take away. These are suggestions that have been put forward to you. I note, I did want to speak to the second comment, and I believe there'll probably be some discussion over this one today. The right to apply for travel overseas. The intention of officers here is simply to make sure that the expenses policy is in line with both the delegations and also in line with the training policy, so that any overseas travel is not a right but is brought back to council for approval. There is one other point that I'd like to make. If you're looking at the track changes, you'll notice that some of the structure of the document has been edited a little bit for clarity, and that in particular where that might be brought to your attention is where the mayor's expenses are separated from those of elected members, so that there's a clear distinction and separation there. And I also noted that in the training policy, which was there for your reference, that there are a few minor amendments that will need to be made to bring that up to currency. For example, there's a reference to the Finance and Performance Committee, which of course is now the Finance and Audit Committee.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So first up is Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Hannah. I've got a couple of questions about the other changes that you've recommended in 4.13.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, removing the allowance for a personal telephone plan. Can you just explain the rationale around that?
The rationale around that is just bringing the policy up to date, really. The cost of having a landline and the cost of having broadband has changed a lot since this particular clause has been reviewed.
So do you think that $150 covers the cost of a mobile phone use over a year?
So the figure itself is set by the Rem Authority rather than by officers. So the 150 for a mobile plan is what the Remuneration Authority sets rather than us.
Okay, so you would agree that $150 doesn't cover the cost of a mobile phone use for a year?
Whether I agree or not is not actually relevant to what the Rem Authority decides.
Well, it is, because you've suggested...
Councillor, that's been answered. We'll move on.
Well, I don't understand why then given that $150 is a very small amount to use your mobile phone for you, I don't understand why we'll be removing the allowance for a personal telephone plan. And I don't understand the rationale for that. Are you able to explain that further? Is it because you don't consider that people have landlines anymore? I'm not following the thinking there.
No, people do have landlines, Councillor. It's just that the amount that was set there of $400 is not a current. Yeah. Let's just put it this way. Any recommendation that's there in 4.13, or actually in the entire report, is entirely up to elected members whether they believe it's appropriate or not. This is
this is a policy specifically around your own expenses, so your own experience would certainly inform the decision that was made today.
Yes, I was just seeking to understand the thinking. So moving on then to removing councillors' right to apply for overseas travel, unnecessary for councillors to go abroad unless on behalf of the mayor. Can you explain how you think that the change that has been suggested gives us more accountability than we currently have? Because my understanding is currently, if a councillor wishes to apply for money to travel abroad for a training programme, that has to be approved by the mayor and deputy mayor anyway.
Yes, and that's where the distinction, there was an issue that the expenses policy wasn't in line with that practice, which was noted in both the delegations and also in the training policy, as you point out. So the practice is exactly right, and we're not trying to suggest that we change the practice, but simply just wanting to bring the two in line.
So I'm just not sure then if that was the intention, that the clause that says it's unnecessary for councillors to go abroad unless on behalf of the mayor, it actually reflects that current practice, because certainly in my memory, councillors have travelled abroad, not on behalf of the mayor, for a training opportunity.
I accept that.
So wasn't your intention then that councillors wouldn't travel overseas for training if that was
not.
approved? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Hannah. Just a few questions here. The first one was that I went looking for the original of this and thought I might find it online and didn't, but found it from quite a few other councils online, and just wondered, is our usual practice and intent to have this publicly available?
It will be from now on. It was available to you on LG Hub, but it was not on our website, you're correct.
Great, thank you. On page 37 of our papers, there's one of the components there around needing to disclose reimbursements as gifts, and I was a bit trying to understand that as a hypothetical, if I needed to go to some other city and represent the council at some event, I'd sort of see that as doing my job rather than receiving a gift if there's some reimbursement around that. So I was just trying to understand where the rationale was around that.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. If you received a gift, the suggestion would be that would be noted on the gift register.
Could you expand that, Councillor Barrett?
Yeah. So the specific so it's page 37, the sort of third box from the bottom. It says if the travel costs are being paid by somebody, and again, if I were to go, to Wellington to represent council at something, I wouldn't see them covering my travel costs as a personal gift. I'd see it as covering a cost of me doing my job.
If an external party paid for you to travel to Wellington to represent the council, the request would be that was noted on the gift register.
I think that's clear, Councillor Barrett. I think it's more in line that if you're invited by is my understanding, if you're invited by an outside organisation, then it's not council business.
Well, you go to
well, it
awards
is. You're
and all
representing council, but it's still, for clarity, you're still receiving. It's just a declaration. It's not saying you can't have it. Anyway, I've got you on the queue.
Yeah, it looks like there might be some others who want to weigh in on that, so yeah. I'll move on to other questions. Great to see some thinking there around other transport modes, Hannah. Just wanted to check in. So there wasn't sort of explicit example of sort of regional buses or capital connection, et cetera, but quite a bit of reference to the different rates for cars and that. But sort of is this policy seen as being inclusive of those other transport options? Should they be preferred or available?
Yes, so actually the wording, you're right, does specifically point out bus, but I think that was because we were thinking that people would be travelling inside the city, but there's no reason why councillors couldn't amend that to include public transport to Wellington, for example.
And I guess to pick up on that, so you would need amendment from us to include that at this stage?
Yes.
Okay. I think my final question was just around the third recommendation, which refers to, in the quotes there, elected and appointed member, and it's slightly pedantic, I realize, but I think in the singular, you're either elected or appointed, not both, and just wanted to make sure we weren't tying ourselves in a small knot there in terms of suggesting that people could be both elected and appointed.
Through you, Madam Chair, maybe when we get to the debate, we can come up with a solution.
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading that. Yes, we can sort that out when we do the recommendations.
Great, I'll leave it there. Thanks,
okay.
Madam Chair.
Thanks. Next up, Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Hannah. I've just got a couple of questions to clarify from what I've heard. I just want to make sure I understand. So Councillor Barrett was highlighting the disclosure on the gift register. And so the Deputy Mayor and I, we went up to Wairoa District Council a couple of years ago to speak to them about youth engagement, and they paid for our travel. So that would, even though that was on council business, it wasn't something we could claim through this council. That would then be disclosed as a gift of travel.
Yes.
Okay. With the response to Councillor Johnson around the landline, the use of a personal telephone, where you said that the $400 don't represent what that cost is anymore. What would be a figure that would represent cost?
Councillor, Hannah's already answered those questions, and if you want to change that, you can make a recommendation at the end.
With respect, Madam Chair, she hasn't given a figure. She's just said that label of $400 doesn't reflect the cost. So I'm asking for some advice on what does reflect the cost.
Well, she's unsure about that cost, and she's already said that, so I'm disallowing the question.
Okay, my next question is around the introduction of the payment for maintaining a bike. What would the process be to verify that before somebody is claiming that cost? Because obviously it's a vehicle that you don't necessarily purchase a new one that regularly. So how do we verify that cost?
Sure. So the item itself, I think it's been itemised as the maintenance or repair. So you would be providing a receipt and claiming that expense. So that would be up to the member to determine that that was appropriate, fill in that form and provide the expense, to attach the receipt.
Okay, so in a situation like a bicycle where somebody might be doing their own regular maintenance, is there a provision for somebody to claim that cost because they are doing that themselves? They're not taking it in to be serviced, or, it's not the same as getting a warrant of fitness or taking it to a mechanic. Perhaps there's a little bit more servicing at home to maintain?
If there were the costs of that service, so for example, puncture repair had to be purchased or something of the like, then yes, that would be possible.
Okay. And then just in regards to the change suggested on page 37 around the overseas travel, I've heard what you've said around bringing that into line with the delegations and training policy. A similar question to Councillor Johnson around that approval currently requires the Mayor's sign-off unless it's over a certain threshold, which comes through the chamber. So that's for all domestic travel, but this policy doesn't, or this doesn't allude to the fact that all training requires the Mayor's approval under a certain threshold. There's the discretion for that. So I was confused about why overseas was deleted to bring in line with the policy when that doesn't actually bring it in line.
Sure. So I think this The issue is where that in the second bullet point where it says the appropriate approvals outlined in this policy. So it was particular to the approvals in this policy and it wasn't extending it against the delegation or against the training policy. So I think having re-looked at this, I would advise that you consider including or overseas, but that you then, if you did that, either added reference to the delegations or reference to the training policy, which specifies that that delegation of $2,000 is only within New Zealand.
And so just to clarify, the suggestion to remove or overseas wasn't to limit
Correct.
overseas travel. It was to try and streamline our policies.
Yes.
Thank you. And does that apply to the, there's also a strikeout on page 37 to remove other than the mayor's spouse or partner attending a conference in association with the mayor. Understanding further down the document, there is under the mayor's section more detail, which actually does allow the
That's
mayor's
right.
partner to attend. So is that just a...
So just removing it from the section on elected members and making sure it's noted in the section for the mayor. So there, again, there's no intention to remove the right of the spouse to attend the conferences, which is listed under the mayor's section.
Okay, thank you.
You've finished, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thanks, Hannah, for the report. Just further on the same point, actually, I had that highlighted too. Deleting the provision on page 37 for the mayor's spouse to attend a conference in association with the mayor, and then looking at the allowances for the mayor. In the wording on page 38, it only refers to the mayor's spouse or partner attending functions. And I'm just wondering if the intention is to retain the ability for the mayor's spouse to attend a conference, whether that needs to be explicit.
Councillor, in the left-hand column, it's listed travel, conferences, courses and seminars. So it's referring to functions of that nature.
And so from the way that I read it, the travel, conferences and courses and seminars relates to the mayor's attendance, but the wording that specifically relates to the mayor's spouse only refers to functions. So I'm just wondering if it's to be deleted on the part in page 37, but if our intention is to retain that, whether that needs to be specifically added into the wording that relates to the mayor's spouse on page 38. Would that require an amendment, or
certainly any changes to this policy before it's passed today for the purpose of clarity? It would be, we want to make things clear. So if there's an ambiguity there, it would be, it would be fantastic if the elected members put an amendment in.
Thank you. And just one other question. I couldn't see anything specifically related to reimbursing the cost of alcohol in the policy. I can see that in page 37 it talks about reasonable expenses, and there's also a definition of reasonable expenses. But are you able to? Was there any consideration given when in the adjustments in this policy to clarify whether alcohol would be reimbursed and whether that was appropriate or not?
It's listed on the bottom of page 7.
Last paragraph, Councillor, on page 37. The council will only pay for 2 beverages, etc. So it's clarified there.
But that's the current
that's
policy.
for a
There's
conference.
no change there.
So it's clarified for a okay. Okay, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trying to avoid going over some of this, but I think we've all had similar questions. I have a question about the definition of official business or council business that you've reviewed here, Hannah. So first, this might be a very policy wonkish question, but in 4.5 you say council business is defined as, but in the document it says council business includes. So those are different things. One's a definitive list and one's a suggestion. So which is it? Is it a definitive list or is it things that it includes?
That's a sticky question. It's listed in the definitions, so within the context of the document, it's being used as a definition. I think previous councillor referred to, it being reasonable expenses and that the expenses would still need to be approved. So I think that the word includes allows for some contextual decision making to still occur rather than be an absolute line in the sand.
So the definition as stands is a suggested list. It's not a closed list. And then a follow-up from that, and you're right, I think your report says it's a very broad list. I just wondered how that list references Council's commitment to tikanga Māori. So attending functions, pōwhiri, mihi whakatau, how would that be included there?
There would be an option to explicitly include that in the list if councillors would like to do that. I don't see how it's currently excluded from the council business definition as it stands.
So where would you see it? Where would you see it being included? Which of those?
Meetings with community groups, meetings with members of the public.
Okay. So you wouldn't see it being excluded as social activity?
No.
Okay, thank you. I probably will bring something up about clarifying that. Back to the personal phone plan, sorry. Just a follow-up question from the questions raised. What do the REM authority say about personal phone plans? Have they taken that out as no longer necessary?
It's still listed as an option.
And what value did they put on that?
The values that are listed.
The $400.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. On hearings, participation in hearings, towards the bottom of that, the chair of a hearing may also be paid for time spent writing up the decision or communicating for the purposed, spelling mistake there, of the written decision. You'll know we've recently had issues where members of a hearing have also required to be paid for the purpose of communicating for the written decision, but this only specifies the chair being paid for that.
This is the particular wording from the determination. It is an extremely complicated space, so this is verbatim from the determination.
So are you saying it can't be changed because it's from the determination?
Yes.
So we can't add to the bullet points under elected members communicating for the purposes of the written decision?
We can certainly put it forward to the Remuneration Authority, but I'm not aware that would be accepted as practice.
So how have we paid that previously?
So when a councillor is elected to a panel and puts in their expense claim, they list and are asked to decide which part they are claiming for so that we can match it against all of the separate, there's 5 or 6 different categories within the RMA that you can be paid for. So that's how that happens.
Okay, I'll probably seek to clarify that as well. And then I think my last question was the next paragraph in that section, reimbursement should not exceed the length of time of the hearing. I just wanted to know what the thinking is. Why do we think that the preparation time should match the hearing time?
Again, that's not something that PNCC has decided. That's something that's set by the Act. That preparation time is not to exceed the total hearing time, and site visits are paid separately.
That might have some counterintuitive outcomes of people extending the hearing in order to.
Question, councillor.
I'll come back to that in comment. Okay, I think that's all of mine. Thanks. Thanks, Hannah. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you. A little bit of a turn tack, but I'm just thinking about it when reading it. The gift register. If a councillor is invited to speak, not as a councillor, but at that meeting, a lot of council questions are asked, is that then deemed he or she was there as a council representative?
I think that would be up to the individual councillor to decide.
Yeah, I probably go to 2 or 3 meetings a month where I go as representing someone else, another organisation. But 9 times out of 10, I get asked a lot of questions about council. So and then you get
Councillor,
gifts.
Councillor, I think this is outside the scope.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay.
Moving on.
Right.
Another question?
But when you see it, and when you see it worded.
Yep.
It
No,
leaves it
we're
quite
moving
open.
on. Thanks, Councillor.
Okay.
Right. Mr Mayor.
No, all of my questions have been answered, but you will definitely get some comment from me.
Okay. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was around the expense policy. I just wanted to understand when the travel for the Mayor's spouse or partner was struck out, is that captured somewhere else, or what was the purpose of that being excluded?
So the mayor's spouse section has just been moved to the mayor's expenses
Okay,
rather
so
than
that's
inside
just,
the elected
you've
members.
just kept that in that. So taking it out one place, included another. I'm happy with that. That's all, Madam Chair. Thank you. Just wanted to confirm that.
Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one follow-up question from something that Councillor Naylor said. Under page 37, where she raised the final box, council will only pay for 2 beverages. It's just under the conference and training expenses, and it specifies that this is while attending a training course. Possibly even a broader question for the document as a whole. We have been, is it correct, make sure this is a question, is it correct that we have been applying this as a general rule for council business as well as conferences and trainings? Or do we have a specific policy for, I guess, meal and beverage reimbursement for elected members who are on council business? For example, the Multicultural Council dinner that runs annually that elected members attend. Or what is it? What's our process been? Because this one's quite specific to training, but I couldn't find anywhere else in the document where we refer to the meals and the beverages. And so I guess my question is, do we just apply this as a general rule to elected member expenses, or are we saying that this is just for training?
I actually wouldn't be able to answer that question without going back to the historical record and looking at what the expense claims have shown. Sorry, but I can certainly do that homework.
Okay, and then just a follow-up question, if that's okay, is would you see the need for a more general section within this document that does apply to general council business reimbursements? I guess taking on board some of it is around travel or meals or beverages, rather than having it broken down to very specific sections around training and conferences? Or do you think that this gives enough guidance for staff to say that this is a general level of acceptance on what would be reimbursed?
I think the phrase here at the very beginning of the document about its title, authentication, gives a high level context on which individual decisions could be made. I haven't seen any behaviour that would make me concerned.
So there's nothing in here that would say if an elected member was seeking reimbursement for beverages at something that was not a training course, for example, when they were on official council business, that whilst this limits it to 2 beverages, that somebody couldn't go and order, 10 Sprites.
I'll just let the CFO.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if your answer is found on the bottom of page 35, where there's an other category. I can read it out. Other expenses will be reimbursed to or paid on behalf of elected members where, in the opinion of the chief executives, such expenses are justified.
I think it would. I guess I just want to know, would staff just use the document as a whole to apply that reimbursement? So, for example, we've got the 2 beverage limit. Would that be then assumed that actually that is the parameters of applying that section? I think that section answers my question.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just one further question related to the reimbursement of the cost of alcohol, which I think Councillor Rutherford's clarified some of that through her questioning. But under the entertainment and hospitality sections on page 38 and 39, is there any specific limitations around the reimbursement of alcohol under those categories currently?
I think the only limit that is there is, again, that it has to be fair and reasonable, and that any expenditure in those cases is signed off by the one above. So in this case, the pages you're referring to are the pages for the Mayor, in which case the Chair of the Finance and Audit Committee oversees those expenses.
Okay, thank you. And just one further question. Is the gift register available online to the public?
Not currently.
Is there the intention that that will be provided, or where is that reported, I guess, is the question.
Can I ask the CFO how that works with gift
Yes,
registers
you
in
may.
general?
It's not currently publicly available to Lord, I don't believe. It is looked at by Audit New Zealand. They review it as part of their review, but it's not a publicly available document at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me come back in. I'd realised I'd missed a question under 4.6, where, Hannah, you allude to elected members exercising their judgment to determine whether or not it meets the definition of primary business. And then obviously the CFO just referred to that other category where the CEO can decide that it does. Is that the, I hesitate to say appeals process, but yeah, how do we process this? If an elected member says, I think this is council business, and governance says, it doesn't look like council business to me, how does that work? Because it seems to suggest here that that's an elected member decision, but experience would show otherwise.
Yeah, so any expense needs to be claimed. So as you allude to, Councillor, there's a process for doing that, and it does come through governance. Then there is a form to fill in. Ultimately, yeah, I suppose the authority sits with the CEO.
Okay, thank you. And just in general, how are expenses and allowances reported? So claims under this policy, how is that reported to committee?
It's not reported to committee, but it does go out in the Friday compendium and is shared with the media with all of your meeting attendance figures annually.
Great, thank you. That's it. Promise.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further questions? Right, that's good. So what I'm proposing to do is have an early morning tea, because we've got a whole lot of recommendations and I want to sort those out. So we will do that now. I'll need, because with staff need a break. So we'll come back here at 10:30. So we'll adjourn until 10:30.
It's probably.
Oh, yeah. Well, all of us, there's two doctors, all this stuff's following. Seriously, it's. Well, yeah, that's the sad thing about it. It's kind of. Headline and stuff. Yeah. That's right. So these jobs. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's been here. Yeah. Emailed her a couple of days ago asking for her to put questions regarding the current stuff in writing. So. I wonder if yeah, yeah, I remember that was a report. Yeah. I could see if one that was available to come along with it. They had a monitoring to do. It's a good idea, actually. I think they're Wellington based. But hopefully, if they had answers to your questions, you know, if you're going to get them to answer your questions in writing. I think it was the way of saying treating this. Yeah, yeah. One person is, well, I mean, is that, yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the thing. No one wants to stop for only 2 hours. Yeah. Yeah. Got to do that career street report. So, yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, yeah. Oh, he's already trying to actually work. He's done some previous stuff for through pricing about what summer aims are going to do. Summer hazing, the depot to do. The key thing about the depot is comprehensive. Yeah, where the river should go. Yeah, yeah. Who's going to maintain those? Yeah. But we can find another site. Yeah, that's. Jump off his lane of yeah. And in storage and whatever else. That's pretty sick. That's pretty sick. Fine greens back in the district. Yeah, sure. I think sure. The problem you employ someone one person, they're never going to think of finance, property planning, design, but as you know, yeah, yeah. And they've put together a team because that's yeah. If we employed someone, they'd still be engaging. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but we also just give them a brief, which is okay. Understand what's in the depot, find another site, work out when you're going to move from there, work out what the cost is, develop a plan, get a consent. Yeah. Oh, that'd be a perfect location. Well, I've got to go to my uncle's funeral. You can. Something could be. Yeah, really awesome. Yeah, really awesome. It's good. I asked for a report on, but he didn't. Oh, cool. Yeah.
Right, how are you?
lovely. Oh, now I did think about, about the plan yesterday about, you talked about the gorge and road and pulling Māori into that. I'm just going into that project and we've got it in our plan. We probably need to alert Julie in terms of procurement policy to make sure it lines up here.
I'll just send you an email, just chat to make an inquiry around.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've had a couple of meetings. Good value.
It's his school bus. This is the thing, isn't it? That
councillors, we do have probably another 5 minutes till we get this sorted, so there's no rush if you need to do something. Yeah.
I've got a dinner, I've got 6 minutes here. So I'm arriving, I've got the Prime Minister tomorrow morning, and then I'm leaving straight from Food HQ to head to Taco.
So I'm leaving at 3 o'clock. Okay. 2, 3 o'clock.
Well, I've got this dinner. The 6 and Bruce and Chief.
Mate,
yeah.
Other than that, we hadn't anticipated. So, I mean, I think we can do our best to yeah, that's, I mean, taking them out saved about 15 grand. Put them back in. Yeah, and so put them back in and get underway. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
out of this. You know, we can afford someone to do this job. We don't need 2 people doing it.
Right, councillors, we are reconvening. Thank you for your patience. Now, we have one recommendation that I'm going to put ahead of the others, because if this recommendation gets voted on, it's pointless having a great discussion on the others. So the first recommendation to be put forward, if we could, that the elected members and expenses and allowance policy be referred to a workshop, and that's moved by Councillor Barrett and seconded by Councillor Johnson. So, Councillor Barrett, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In my view, there's some work yet to be done here. I do appreciate what the officers are trying to achieve in working with us, but my feeling is that what has been brought to us today is not yet a finished product. In fact, it is not even near a finished product, and we have a choice of spending some hours here trying to finish it around this table, or spending some time probably more efficiently in a workshop to actually bring this back to a form where we can then have a substantive public debate around the acceptance or otherwise. But I do not feel that what's been brought to us is ready at this point, which is why I'm recommending that we do put it to a workshop.
Councillor Johnson, do you wish to speak?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I just think there are any situation where a policy is brought to us and then there are a series of amendments is not the best way to form policy. And we'd be much better to give some reflection to this and have a discussion at a workshop. And perhaps at that stage, we might be able to get some answers to some of the rationale as to why some of these changes were proposed, which I didn't feel were well answered.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this recommendation. I have a growing sense of unease about the amount of discussion that is occurring in workshops as opposed to a transparent discussion in council meetings. And in particularly where we're dealing with sensitive expenditure that relates to elected members, I think we need to be even more careful to do that in a transparent way. It doesn't mean we need to finalise everything today or sign off on a completed document, but I do believe that a council meeting is a more transparent way for us to raise the issues and give direction to the specific areas that we would like refined within the policy. So I won't be supporting this.
Are there any? Councillor Rutherford?
A question of process, Madam Chair, is that if this recommendation passes, what will happen with the proposed amendments? Would they be referred to a workshop for consideration?
Yes,
or?
Yes, we won't debate those today. We'll move the whole lot to the workshop.
And they would be considered to be brought into the draft
Yes.
policy?
Yep. Okay. Just before you finish, Councillor Johnson, I'd just like to make a comment. My preference is I don't want to support this. I think we've done a lot of discussions today. I prefer it to be in a public open forum where we're debating. This is council expenditure and I want it to continue in the open forum so there's no miscommunication that we're going behind back doors discussing policy. And we're still going to have to come back and re-litigate it. So what's the point of re-litigating it and behind closed doors or spending the time today? It's fresh in our mind, all the amendments, I've got them all lined up. So why do we have to do this behind closed doors? Councillor, do you want to speak before Councillor Dennison or after Councillor Johnson?
I just want to respond to some points that Councillor Naylor raised and yourself.
I'll let Councillor Dennison go first and then come back to you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was wanting to move the recommendations in the report as a notice of motion if this fails, and that gives some shape and reserve my right to speak afterwards. The only thing I want to say in 3 is that it say elected and or appointed member, not or member. Was that? Oh no, I won't do it. I'll move them unchanged. Thank you, and I'll call for a seconder.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, so I just want to respond to the allegations made by Councillor Naylor and yourself that moving this to a workshop is some means of trying to get something done in secret or not being public about things. It's absolutely not that. What it's about is about having a lengthy discussion with the answers to the questions that we have asked officers being provided and coming to some reasonable formulation after some thought. This is the first time that this has been presented to us. Doing policy on the fly, in my experience, around council table, generally leads to bad policy. Any draft that might be determined from a workshop will come to a public meeting. It will be discussed publicly. So I really think that the allegations that this is somehow a means of trying to pull the wool over the public's eyes or do stuff in secret are quite unreasonable and in fact not true.
If I may just comment, it's more a perception, not that I thought that. Councillor Naylor, did you wanting to ask something or?
I was just indicating that I'd be happy to second the notice of motion that Councillor Dennison
Okay,
indicated
so
he
it's
would
not on. Okay.
do if this motion fails.
Okay, now back to you, Councillor Barrett. Would you like to write a reply?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just to briefly add to some of the recent commentary, I certainly don't see this as a matter of trying to do anything in secret or to do deals behind closed doors at all. That is absolutely not what this is about. And it could be quite reasonable that a workshop might actually give rise to different options that then come back into a public forum for debate. So to try to frame a workshop as trying to finalize something is not what this is about. We're trying to use a workshop so that we can actually just get some well-distilled, clear, internally coherent options back to council to actually consider at that point. I'll leave it there in terms of comment. I think that most of my earlier comments summarize my concern around the state of what's been brought to us today. And again, it's that concern that it is still a bit messy that's really driving this recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You've had your right of reply, so I won't be taking any more comments after the right of reply. So we will now move to vote on the recommendation. And that is carried, 11 votes for, 6 against. So what I will do now is move that all the recommendations from the meeting be put forward to the workshop.
Point of order, Madam Chair. There's no recommendations passed by this committee. That was the only.
Oh, sorry, I missed something. Yes, but I'll pass them on. So yep. Yes, sorry. Yes, you're right. I don't need a motion. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Right, so we'll move on to our next business. So that is item number 7 on, oh no, we're on to now onto the work schedule. Oh, it's been a morning. Now, I would just like to bring your attention to item number 3, which is the expenses of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. There was some confusion on the report about the content of the report of whether it includes office expenses and travel expenses. So what I propose to do is put up a recommendation that gives clarity to the staff of what exactly is the content of that recommendation. And I think it's up. Oh, good. Thank you. It's just that it's behind me and I wasn't looking in front of me. So the second recommendation is there that the annual expenses of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor report address sensitive expenditure, and the expenses of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be reported separately, because in the draft report they were separated. So is there any questions around Councillor Rutherford and then Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 2 questions to clarify. When you say the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be reported separately, that just alludes to the Mayor's expenses and then the Deputy Mayor's expenses?
Yes.
And how do you define sensitive expenditure? Like, obviously that doesn't include their photocopying costs. What would be included in that?
I will ask the CFO to define that, because it's...
Thank you.
So in our language terminology, sensitive expenditure is that's put on the Mayor or Deputy Mayor's credit card or expense reimbursements that they're seeking from council, and that would be all.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
My question's been answered. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
I think that the direction, I understand the report that came to the agenda meeting, it hasn't come to this meeting. I had understood that we were going to be seeking more specific direction from the committee about the content of that report. So I do think we need to be a little bit more specific than what's in the current recommendation. In my view, the report that came to the agenda meeting was mostly appropriate, but needed to have some further context. And by that, I mean, it didn't have any sort of comparison to previous years. And where there were large amounts that were over budget, there weren't any context given to those. So I would have thought that sensitive expenditure should also include hospitality, gifts, Mayor's Relief Fund, training, travel accommodation, and not just what's on credit cards. I think we do need to seek a fairly broad representation of the discretionary. What I had thought we were seeking was the discretionary expenditure of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. So by discretionary, I would define that as the ones that they get some choice, some influence or choice over. So I do think it needs to be clear, rather than another report coming that then doesn't get to this table. We do need to ensure that that's comprehensive enough for the needs of accountability.
Councillor Bowen.
Well, my question was about the definition of sensitive, which has been covered, but I wonder if I could seek a comment from the CFO about the broader definition that Councillor Naylor is proposing. Through you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I think we need absolute clarity about what's been asked for. So there's been, I guess, some confusion, and Councillor Naylor referred to a report that was prepared earlier, a lack of understanding from our perspective about exactly what you're looking for. I think if there is some confusion around sensitive expenditure and there's things outside of that definition I gave you that you're seeking, I think we need you to clarify, give us some clarity around exactly what you're talking about. So, I mean, obviously we have information on everything, but if you want a report on specific things, you need to tell us what those specific things are.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just recently come to this discussion in terms of understanding some of the broader context around it. I suppose my preference would be that we do actually look at it from a discretionary lens first, and make sure that we're seeing the whole picture there. I think it'd be reasonable that the community would expect and hope to see that. So I'd move an amendment that we replace sensitive with discretionary, and seek a seconder for that.
Happy to second that.
I'll just get the CFO to comment on that.
I guess my concern is my definition of discretionary may differ from your definition of discretionary, and we, I guess, made an attempt to do something like that, and as Councillor Naylor has alluded to, it wasn't what she had asked for, and so a little bit difficult to me to understand, I guess, exactly what you mean by discretionary.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Can I just clarify that the report, I didn't say that the report wasn't what I had asked for. I was quite comfortable with the report.
Okay. Councillor Finlay.
Yeah, I was quite surprised to hear that the Mayor's discretionary fund should be reported to the council, because that's money that we vote for him to use on his discretion. He can't overspend it, but it's on his discretion. For him to have to report to us on his discretion is ridiculous. I think it's up to him to spend it as he feels, and not have to come back and report to us.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Can I just ask why this report was pulled from the meeting, or who pulled it, and on what grounds?
Because the author of the report was not at the meeting, and there was a lot of questions around the report had too much information in it. There wasn't enough clarity in the report. So I chose to pull it so that we could come back to the workshop and get a clarity through the members of exactly what it was that you wanted.
So it was your decision?
Back to the committee. No, it's not my. It was my overall decision. Yes, to pull it, to cut so that you can come.
Because
back.
there was too much information in it.
Yes, and it wasn't. There wasn't. Yes, there's too much information in it, and it wasn't. And there was confusion around the staff, and also Councillor Naylor at the time as to actually what the report should have had. So my suggestion was that it was to come back to this committee so that we could seek clarity. It wasn't anything else.
Okay, it's just that Councillor Naylor's suggesting that she was happy that the report be presented.
Well, I would differ on that, but I'm not going to discuss it at this meeting.
Can I just, can I make a comment? So ultimately, it's my decision whether a report is withdrawn from an agenda. And I supported that on the basis that we would be having this discussion now to seek more clarity so that we could prepare a report that was reflective of the wishes of council, of this committee, I should say, sorry.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel a bit odd commenting on my my own office, but look, there's no issues around releasing this information, and actually it goes to the media annually anyway. And I think the report that I saw, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with. My understanding of what the member that brought this forward was around the discretionary and relief funds. And again, I have no issue. I do release that information to you as elected members, but we can do it in a more formal basis. In fact, I'm probably going to release that today anyway, in an unofficial sense. But I would have to say it's hard to really, perhaps, I think there was the comment, track it from what previous years have been, because no other mayor's been under this level of scrutiny, and I have no issues with it, but it's really hard to track it from other mayors because I'll be the first that's doing this. And that's being transparent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a, if you would like, definition as travel, accommodation, gifts, hospitality, mayoral relief fund. Would that cover? Yeah. Well, that covers, and a lot of that stuff will appear on. I mean, we're going to go round and round in circles on that, councillors. So we can, I can either leave that up there and we vote on it, or we can move it with the workshop with the councillors' expenses if you so wish to.
No.
So we'll go around again for questions and then we're going to vote on it. Councillor Johnson, Councillor Barrett, is there anybody else that wants to discuss? So Councillor Johnson, you've got the floor.
Thank you. Is there any reason why the report that was pulled couldn't just be presented to the next meeting of Finance and Audit?
It can be, but it's...
Rather than people doing more work? I mean, what I guess, what extra information was in there that you didn't think we needed?
The mayor's car allowances, there was office expenses, which were total office expenses. The deputy mayor's expenses and the mayor's were together in one. It would have raised a lot of questions and we would have been here for another 3 hours. So it was like, it raised more questions than, so that was the reason why. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, I suppose I'd start with a question because I'd understood, at least in my own mind from my previous comment, where I expressed that I wish to move an amendment that we change sensitive to discretionary. And when that was subsequently verbally seconded by Karen Naylor, that had become the substantive. And I was just wanting to understand what, in your view, Madam Chair, the substantive is at this point.
That is the amendment.
Great.
We'll go through the amendment next. Your amendment
Great.
will have to be. So that will be the order we take it in. Councillor Naylor, was it you next?
I just thought it was worth clarifying because there's been some discussion about the draft or the report that had come to the agenda meeting and whether or not I was comfortable with it. I did advocate that that report come to this meeting because I thought it would be useful for elected members in helping them define the direction that needed to be given to what reporting was required going forward. The only issue that I hadn't thought was what I was expecting about the report was that the expenses were combined between the mayor and deputy mayor, and I advocated that there should be 2 separate reports, one for the deputy mayor and one for the mayor. So I just thought it was worth me clarifying that, but I certainly advocated that the report come to this meeting.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on record, I have no issues if that report comes forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Finlay.
I think the Mayor just asked my question. I was just going to ask the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, do they have any problems with that report coming forward? And if they don't, why are we doing this?
Right, what we will do is we will vote on the amendment. Oh, hard to read. Okay, so we will vote on that. Sorry. And that is carried 13 votes for, 2 against, and 2 abstentions. Okay, so I will now move the work schedule unless there's any other comment. Oh, sorry. Okay, now we'll move the substantive, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody want to speak to the substantive? Councillor Johnson.
Just to make sure that we include the report back on the business continuity planning review for December.
Oh, okay, that's something. Thank you. Okay, thank you. We will. So everybody like to vote on that? So we're voting on both 1 and 2 now. Okay, we're not voting on 1 and 2, we're separating them. So we'll now vote on number 2 first. What's easy? Yep, that's right. Yeah, but now means we've got to do the vote separately. We're doing number 2 first. So we're voting for number 2. Oh, no, voted for the wrong thing, but it doesn't matter. No, it's fine, it's carried, it's not a big deal. So we're now voting for number 1. So I will vote appropriately this time. So that is carried unanimously. So I now close the meeting of the Finance Committee and Finance and Audit Committee.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, we'll kick straight into the